what really makes an origin story unbelievable, especially when we're considering the fact that they actually exist in a fantastical world where aliens, magic, and unbelievable scientific advancements also exist. Welcome back, Nerd Squad, it's me, Amanda, and I am back with another top 10 superhero origin stories we can't believe happened. Part 2. Let's get weird. Number 10. Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler. Oh boy. I still think to this day one of the weirdest facts about him is that he's the son of Mystique and Azazel, a demon who claims to be the devil. Azazel is also weird in the sense that he comes with his own lore as part of a race of demonic mutants known as the Neophim, who were opposed to a race of angelic-looking mutants known as the Chearophim, that apparently Angel is also one of. Nightcrawler would be abandoned shortly after he was born by his mother, who was fleeing an angry mob. He'd be taken in by a family tied to Magik, the Zardoses, and later would also end up dating his foster sister, Jermaine Zardos, who we'd later come to know as Amanda Sefton. Which, I mean, granted she was kinda undercover at the time, but still, I feel like if you know your foster sister, you know who your foster sister is. Don't think her being like, my name's Amanda, would change it for me. I'd be like, wait, but you look exactly like my foster sister. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love when we talk about weird stuff, we have a weirdest playlist for you to check out, so go check that out after. Number 9. Booster Gold. Booster Gold is a time-traveling hero from the future, and from the look of him, you might not even guess this, considering that for a hero who should hail from a more advanced timeline, he often isn't known for being one of the best or the brightest. Booster Gold was actually Michael Carter, who was born during the 25th century in Gotham. His dad left his family when he was young to pursue his obsession with gambling, and leaving his family deep in debt. In order to help his sick mother, Michael would eventually also follow in his father's footsteps to earn the money he needed to help her get well again. His mother would end up being saved, but following the revelation of how Michael had gotten that money through gambling, was also shamed by her son's actions. Michael decided to make things right and set out on a path to make something of himself, and while working as a security guard at a museum, was inspired by the heroes on display there, stealing tech from the museum to travel to the past and become a hero himself, also using his knowledge of the past that he had as someone who came from the future. So he's actually a security guard from the future with basic museum tech, using it to parade around as a hero, which is pretty funny. Especially when you consider Skeets, his little droid that flies around and helps him out, actually is just like basically security tech from the museum. It's like one of those things that's supposed to walk you around the museum and be like, this exhibit is this, here is the history. Number 8. Jean Grey. Jean Grey is not a character you likely think of when you think of unbelievable origins. However, there are some things that I feel like we gotta talk about. Probably you wouldn't think of that because her origin is often explained away by her status as a mutant. But trust me, it gets kinda weird. Jean was only a young girl when her powers first manifested, with her mind becoming bonded to the mind of a young schoolmate just as said schoolmate was hit by a car and basically lay dying. This left Jean pretty much traumatized, and her parents ended up reaching out to Professor Charles Xavier eventually for help. Xavier ultimately placed a mental block in Jean's mind in order to protect her against her insanely powerful telepathic abilities. Years later, Jean would join his school for gifted youngsters, and Charles would also creepily fantasize about what a potential romantic relationship would be like with Jean. Pretty weird, considering everything else we now know. Although he knew this would of course never be possible. Not because he was, years her senior as well as her teacher and her mentor, but because he was confined to a wheelchair. Those are his thoughts, not mine. Oh Charles. Number 7. Hitman. Definitely a strange one, and thank you to Pablo in the comments for the suggestion, who suggested it on my part 1. Well, I'm not really sure if it was intended as a suggestion, but that's definitely how I took it, so here we go. Hitman is Tommy Monahan, the son of a lady of the night who was based in Gotham. His mom, named Catherine Monahan, took to naming her children after the men who used her services and who were the biological fathers of said children, in an attempt to shame them. However, Tommy's father, Tom Dawson, was not a fan of this and actually warned Catherine, threatening her life, that she should not do that. Stubborn, she did so anyways with him, which resulted in her life and the life of her offspring, save Tommy, being lost. Tommy would grow up in a Catholic orphanage and would go on to serve in the military before becoming a hitman. Despite the fact that he was an assassin in the DC universe, Tommy was still considered to be a hero because he avoided killing people who he deemed to be good. During one of his jobs, he ended up in a confrontation with a bloodline parasite, a dragon-like parasitic alien, who attempted to kill him by drinking his spinal fluid, because that's what those guys do. The parasite's attempt failed, and afterwards Tommy observed that he now had low-level telepathic powers. This is a true story from a comic. I mean, it's not a true story, but in the comics world, it's a true story. That happened. Number 6. The Fantastic Four. While the Fantastic Four have become an iconic superhero team as Marvel's first family, when you think about it, their origin story is, pretty strange. Reed Richards was the mastermind behind their transformation, which actually happened not by his own design, but kind of by accident. After facing the threat of a loss of funding for his Starship project, Reed decided to prove the merits of said project by taking his Starship, the Marvel 1, on a test flight, which would thereby prove its worth should the flight be successful, which of course Reed was like, it'll be successful, it'll be great, we're not gonna worry about the fact that I shouldn't even legally probably be doing this. While his friend Ben Grimm was always set to pilot this flight, Reed also agreed to bring along his girlfriend Susan Storm and her younger brother Johnny, who at that time really had no space or flight qualifications to speak of that I know of, and thanks to a storm of cosmic rays, the four were forever changed by the flight. As we know. It's weird that the four of them were the ones that ended up on it. Especially Sue being like, hey, can I bring Johnny, my brother? It's like, sure, why not? We got 4 seats, let's do it. Number 5. Green Lantern. For this origin tale, we're going all the way back to the first Green Lantern, Alan Scott, who also technically isn't really the same kind of Green Lantern as those who would come after him. Instead of being given his powers by the Lantern Corps and the Guardians of the Universe, Scott was basically given his powers and saved by the Green Lantern of Life, later established as an entity held prisoner by the Guardians known as Starheart. In the original story in All American Comics issue number 16, the green light first crash landed to Earth and used its flame in China to bring death, then in America, new life, curing a man who was once insane, and finally saving Alan Scott and granting him the gift of power. Which I also feel like that's kind of weird, because it's like, first there was death, then there was life, now there's power. But I'm like, but you also saved Alan Scott's life, so technically it was like death, life, power. Life power. It's like 2 gifts, really. Number 4. Dazzler. One of my all-time favorite heroes in the comics, Allison Blair, definitely has a strange origin. She is a mutant, which relative to comics is not actually that strange, of course, because there are many mutants. In Marvel Comics there are many other ones at this point that exist, and they have actually become probably some of the most popular groups around in terms of the comic publisher. However, even among mutants, Allison's story is kind of odd. After learning her mutant powers, she was not compelled or inspired like so many others out there to become a hero. Instead, she wanted to use her powers to entertain others and give herself kind of a career boost. Allison's powers often get downplayed, but they are actually insanely powerful. She can transmute sound into light. She can use this light to do a bunch of different things, including shooting powerful lasers, creating massive light explosions, and completely obliterating her enemies. Like literally she's turned people into, I mean, nothing, because they were just like vaporized basically. But that's never really been what Daz is actually about. Instead, she usually just wants to sing and perform while on tour with her band while being accepted for who she is by the world as well as her family and her friends. Built into her origins was also the mystery of what happened to her mother and a dramatic relationship with her father, who kicked her out after she didn't follow in his footsteps and become a lawyer. And I love that these are like major things in her series, as opposed to it being about, you know, like constantly fighting bad guys. That happens too, but it's always like, oh boy, how did I get myself in this situation? Number 3. Martian Manhunter. John Johns definitely has a strange origin story that sounds so fantastical to imagine, especially when you consider some of the weird coincidences involved in it. He was born as a twin, highly unlikely in Martian culture. His twin, however, was considered a mutant, born without any telepathic abilities. As such, his brother, Ma-Alefa-Ak, grew up to hate his people and created a virus to destroy them that infected Martians through their telepathy. On Mars, John was a police officer, and in an attempt to protect his family against this virus, he tried to convince them not to use their telepathic gifts, which they did try to do, but unfortunately that didn't work. This failed, and he lost both his wife. This failed, and he lost both his daughter and his wife, who went up in flames as the virus preyed on the Martians' natural fear of flames, intensifying it to the point that those infected would simply just like burst into flames. Shortly after this, he was pulled to Earth via an experiment of Dr. Saul Erdel, who created a device in an attempt to communicate with aliens, aiming this device at Mars. The device reached across space and time and captured John, who was brought to Earth and made to forget this past trauma through Erdel. The two had basically developed a mental link, and Erdel used this to craft a different backstory for John, which was implanted in the Martian's mind. And he did this kind of as a kindness to help him get over everything that had happened to him. On Earth, John would disguise himself as a human police detective, going by the name John Jones. Number 2. Magik. Magik definitely has a pretty weird one when it comes to her origin, and I saw all y'all in the comments on part 1 being like, but where's Magik? Magik should be on here. You're right, Magik is pretty cool, and that's why she's so high up on this part. She is the younger sister of Colossus and Mikhail Rasputin. Initially, she was kidnapped and held hostage in exchange for the X-Men fighting to free Arcade from Dr. Doom's clutches. Once safe, she ended up moving to the US to live with her brother and the X-Men. However, shortly after this move, young Illyana was once again kidnapped, this time by the powerful demon lord Belasco, who sensed great power in her and took her to Limbo. Here she would be raised to become Belasco's possible heir and also his tool, with him exerting control over her. Eventually, she would return home and would also conquer Limbo, usurping Belasco to become the Dimension's ruler, forever changed from her terrifying time being both tormented and kinda trained in the Hell Dimension. Interesting. Number 1. The Flash. What gave the Flash, Barry Allen, his powers? It turns out he did. Well, initially in the comics, Barry is seen as getting his powers from being doused in chemicals and struck by lightning in his lab following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was retconned that the lightning that actually struck Barry was in fact kind of because of Barry, who was kind of transformed into lightning following his death in Crisis. In Secret Origins issue number 2 from the 80s, we learned that Barry went back in time and kind of gave his past self a choice between becoming a hero and having a shorter life, or possibly having a longer, more normal life. Barry, of course, chose lightning, and here we are. So in a way, Barry actually gave himself his powers because of the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is mind-blowing when you think about it. It's a paradox. That's about it. Until next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube.